The sun was warm on her cheeks, but Captain Eva Rostova felt cold. A deep, marrow-deep chill that no amount of sunlight could ever hope to touch. She stood at a perfect, rigid parade rest, her spine straight, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed on some distant, invisible point past the general's shoulder. The manicured lawn of the military base was a vibrant, insulting green. Birds chirped in the nearby trees, a cheerful sound that felt like a personal betrayal. The general's voice was a steady, booming drum, listing words that had lost all meaning: valor, sacrifice, uncommon courage. The phrases washed over her, not like water, but like mud, thick and suffocating. Each word was a stone added to the invisible weight pressing down on her sternum. The starched collar of her dress blue uniform felt like a razor against her neck. She could smell the faint, sterile scent of polish on her shoes, the vague floral perfume from the wife of a dignitary in the front row. It was all so clean, so ordered, so wrong. Her mind was not here. It was 7,000 miles away, trapped in the coarse beige dust of the Kamdesh Valley. She could feel it, gritty between her teeth, stinging her eyes. She could smell it, that unique Afghan cocktail of dust, diesel fuel, and dried manure. The general spoke of a single heroic action, but her memory was not a single scene. It was a shattered mosaic of terror and resolve. The deafening crack of a sniper rifle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The frantic, guttural shouts of her team. The metallic taste of adrenaline, sharp and coppery on her tongue. Her eyes, dry and burning from the effort of not blinking, dropped for a fraction of a second. They did not see the respectful, somber faces of the audience. They saw Sergeant Miller's face, pale and beaded with sweat, as she pressed a combat gauze into the ruin of his chest. His eyes, wide with shock and a deep, profound sadness, were locked on hers. "Tell my girl," he had whispered, his voice a wet, ragged thing. "Tell my girl her dad loved her." A promise made in the dirt, sealed with blood and the escalating roar of incoming fire. A bead of sweat traced a path from her temple down her cheek. It felt like the tear she would not allow herself to shed. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, their collective gaze of physical pressure. They saw a hero, a stoic officer being honored for her bravery. They didn't see the ghost she was, haunted by the men she couldn't save. They didn't see the woman who, in her darkest moments back home, would wake up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, her ears ringing with a silence that was louder than any explosion. The general's speech was reaching its crescendo. The language grew more formal, more grandiose. He was building to the moment, the pinnacle of the ceremony. Eva forced her gaze back up, fixing it on the bright, fluttering American flag behind the podium. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she believed in. But today, it was just a piece of cloth, flapping in a gentle breeze that couldn't reach the desert where her heart had stayed behind. She took a slow, shallow breath, the air catching in her tight throat. The moment was coming. The medal was coming. And she knew, with a certainty that was more real than the ground beneath her feet, that the polished bronze and ribbon would feel like nothing at all. It was just a piece of metal. It could never replace the weight of a fallen comrade in your arms, or the sound of a friend's final whispered promise. The memory hit her, not like a wave, but like a sudden shift in the atmosphere, the air inside the Chinook helicopter thick with heat and the raw petroleum smell of jet fuel. The vibration was a constant, bone-deep hum through the metal deck plates. Captain Eva Rostova, then just Sergeant Rostova, sat crammed between two hulking figures in full combat gear. This was her third mission embedded with the Ranger team, and the initial prickly skepticism had settled into a watchful, professional tolerance. She adjusted the strap of her helmet, her fingers brushing against the cold, hard plastic. Her world had shrunk to this deafening, shaking metal tube, hurtling through the night toward the unknown. She was the odd one out, the CST, the Cultural Support Team attachment. A woman in a world of men. A linguist in a world of door kickers. Her job was to be a bridge, to talk to the half of the Afghan population the Rangers could never reach, the women. To glean intelligence from whispered conversations in back rooms, to look for the fears and secrets hidden behind burqa veils. It was work that required a different kind of courage, a patience that felt alien in the aggressive. direct action world of the Rangers. The man to her left, Sergeant First Class Marcus Miller, nudged her with his elbow. He was a mountain of a man, his face all hard planes and a jaw that seemed carved from granite. But his eyes, in rare moments of quiet, held a startling kindness. He held out a cracked, laminated photograph. It was a close-up of a baby, all wide, gummy smile and chubby cheeks. "Mia," he shouted over the rotor wash, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise. She smiled for the first time on a video call last week. A real one, not just gas. He stared at the picture with a reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. Eva took the photo, her gloved hand careful. She saw the absolute, unguarded love in Miller's eyes, a vulnerability he showed to no one else. It was a gesture of trust, a tiny offering. "She's beautiful, Marcus," she said, handing it back. He tucked it safely into a Velcro pocket over his heart, patting it once. "Gotta make it back," he said, more to himself than to her. "Gotta make all this mean something." Across from her, Specialist Jim Joker Rivera was trying to get a reaction from the stoic team leader, Staff Sergeant Davis. "Hey, Davis, you think we'll get some of that famous Kamdesh hospitality? Maybe a nice cup of chai?" Davis didn't even look up from the map he was studying, his face illuminated by a red lens headlamp. "Rivera, the only thing waiting for us in Kamdesh is a bunch of lead-painted houses and bad guys who've been shooting at NATO forces since you were in diapers. Stay sharp." The banter was a pressure valve, a way to bleed off the tension that coiled tighter with every passing mile. Eva checked her M4 for the 10th time, the motions mechanical, a calming ritual. She ran through her dairy phrases in her head, the polite greetings, the respectful inquiries about family. She was their key, their ears and their voice. The success of this mission, the safety of these men, hinged partly on her ability to find a truth that guns and bullets never could. The helicopter began its descent, the nose tilting sharply. The mood inside shifted instantly. The joke stopped. The casual slouch disappeared, replaced by a coiled, predatory readiness. The red interior light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. Miller caught her eye and gave a single, firm nod. It wasn't a nod of friendship. Not quite yet. It was a nod of confirmation. "You are here. You are part of this. Do your job." Eva nodded back, her throat tight. The ramp at the back of the helicopter began to lower, revealing a sliver of the pre-dawn sky, a deep, bruised purple. The world outside was waiting. The cold night air rushed in, a shocking slap of reality. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and unnervingly steady. 1 minute. 1 minute until the green light. 1 minute until the world exploded. Eva took a deep breath, the last easy one she would take for a very long time. The green light blinked on, a silent electric command. In an instant, the helicopter was a vortex of controlled chaos. The Rangers surged forward as one, their heavy boots pounding down the ramp into the void. Eva moved with them, a smaller figure swallowed by the mass of gear and weaponry. The world outside was a shock of cold, thin air and absolute darkness. The Chinook lifted away, its thundering roar fading quickly, leaving behind an eerie, ringing silence that felt heavier than the noise. They moved. The first 100 meters were always the worst, a heart-pounding sprint across open ground toward the cover of a dry wadi. Every shadow was a threat, every rock a potential enemy. Eva's world narrowed to the back of Miller's rucksack. The faint glow of the chemical light sticks on his gear, and the sharp professional commands whispered over the radio. They reached the wadi, sliding down its dusty bank into a shallow trench that offered their first shred of concealment. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged breathing and the soft rustle of gear. Staff Sergeant Davis held up a clenched fist, the signal to halt and listen. The valley was still sleeping under a blanket of stars, but the silence felt deceptive. A held breath. They began to move again, a slow, deliberate patrol toward the target village, a cluster of dark, huddled shapes on the hillside a kilometer away. The pace was grueling, a steady climb over broken terrain in the oppressive darkness. Eva focused on her footing, on controlling her breath, on being just another part of the machine. The first sign of life wasn't a soldier, but a rooster. Its crow shattered the pre-dawn stillness, a sound so normal it was jarring. As the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, watery blue, the village started to stir. A donkey brayed. A door creaked open. Davis signaled for the team to take up positions in a ruined compound overlooking the village's main entrance. Their job was to observe, to provide overwatch for the smaller element that would move in at first light. Eva settled in behind a crumbling mud brick wall, scanning the awakening village through her rifle scope. Women in colorful shawls emerged, starting cooking fires. Children, tiny and energetic, began to chase a ragged soccer ball in the dust. It was a scene of mundane life, utterly at odds with the reason they were there. Her eyes kept scanning, looking for the anomalies, the things that didn't fit. A group of men of fighting age clustered not near the fields, but near a specific compound with an unusually fortified wall. Too many antennas on one roof. She keyed her radio, her voice a low murmur. Overwatch, this is CST. I have a group of 6 military-aged males at the compound marked as Bravo. They look agitated, not engaging in normal morning routine. Also, possible command wire running from the north side of that building into the tree line. There was a pause on the other end. Then Davis's voice, tight with focus. Copy that, CST, good eyes. Rivera, you see that wire? A new level of tension settled over the position. She had just proven her worth in a currency everyone understood. She wasn't just there to talk to women anymore. She was another set of eyes, a hunter like the rest of them. The sun crested the mountains, flooding the valley with a harsh golden light. The world was now fully visible, and with the light came a new kind of vulnerability. The team was exposed in their position. The plan was to hold until the ground element was clear, but the atmosphere had changed. The men in the compound had disappeared. The children had been called inside. The village, which had been stirring with life, was now unnervingly still. The rooster was silent. The only sound was the whisper of the wind and the frantic beating of her own heart. Something was wrong. The valley was holding its breath, and they were right in the middle of it, waiting for the storm to break. The first shot was a single sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. It wasn't aimed at them. It was a signal. In the heartbeat of silence that followed, the world erupted. The distinct, chattering roar of a PKM machine gun opened up from a fortified position to their north, stitching a line of dust and rock fragments across the front of their position. Then, from the east, the pop-pop-pop of AK-47s. They were in a kill zone. Contact front. Contact east. Davis's voice was calm, a rock in the sudden storm of noise. Miller, suppress that PKM. Rivera, watch for flankers. The Rangers responded with a disciplined fury. The sharper, faster reports of their M4s answered the enemy's fire. The air became thick with the smell of cordite and kicked-up dust. Eva pressed herself into the dirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't training. The rounds impacting the wall were real. The splinters of flying rock were real. She focused on her sector of fire, scanning the tree line for movement. A flicker, a man darting between 2 trees, an RPG launcher on his shoulder. RPG, tree line 300 meters. She yelled, her voice tight. Miller shifted his fire, a long, controlled burst that forced the insurgent to duck back into cover. Good call, Rostova, Miller shouted, not taking his eye from his scope. The fire intensified. Rounds snapped overhead, a sound like angry hornets. They were pinned down. The machine gun fire was relentless, keeping their heads down while the enemy maneuvered. Davis was on the radio, his voice rising for the first time. We are pinned down at Checkpoint Delta. Request immediate air support and QRF. We have effective enemy fire from 3 sides. An RPG round slammed into the compound wall 20 meters to their left. The concussion was a physical blow, a wave of pressure and deafening noise that showered them with dirt and debris. Ava's ears rang. For a second, the world was muted, a silent film of chaos. She saw Rivera clutching his face, blood seeping between his fingers. A piece of shrapnel had caught him. Miller was already moving low and fast to drag him into better cover. Joker's hit, Miller yelled. It's his eye, Davis cursed. Medevac is going to be a hot one. Everyone, conserve ammo. This is a long way from over. Ava crawled over to Rivera, pulling out her individual first aid kit. His good eye was wide with pain and fear. Hey, look at me, Jim, look at me, she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she tore open a bandage. You're gonna be fine. It's just a scratch. You're still ugly. A weak grin flickered across his face. She pressed the bandage to the wound, applying pressure. Her hands, she noticed, were not shaking. The firefight seemed to stretch into an eternity. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them. The heat was stifling. Sweat and dust caked her face. She alternated between firing aimed shots at muzzle flashes and tending to Rivera. The initial cold fear had been burned away, replaced by a fierce burning focus. They were her team. This was her fight. She wasn't the interpreter anymore. She was a rifleman, a medic, a part of the whole. The world had shrunk to this patch of dirt, the men beside her, and the enemy trying to kill them. The only thing that mattered was the next breath, the next target, the next order, and the desperate, silent prayer for the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the din. The distant thrumming beat was the most beautiful sound Eva had ever heard. It started as a faint vibration in the air, then grew into the distinct, powerful rhythm of approaching helicopter blades. "Air support is 1 minute out," Davis shouted, a raw edge of hope in his voice. "The QRF is 10 mics behind them. We just have to hold." A renewed energy surged through the team. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting toward an exit. Then the sniper shot. It was different from the other gunfire, a single, precise, and brutally efficient crack. It came from a high ridge to the northwest, a place they had thought was out of effective range. Sergeant Miller, who was shifting position to get a better angle on the PKM nest, jerked violently. A fine red mist sprayed the air behind him. He crumpled, falling behind a low section of the wall with a heavy final thud. For a heart-stopping second, everything froze. "Miller's hit! Miller's down!" someone screamed. The world snapped back into horrifying focus, but now the chaos had a terrible new center. Eva's breath caught in her throat. Without a second thought, without a conscious decision, she was moving. "Cover me!" She yelled to no one in particular, and low-crawled, her body flat against the dirt, toward where he had fallen. Rounds kicked up the earth around her, but she didn't stop. She reached him, her hands immediately going to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, thready and weak. His chest was a mess, the body armor having taken the main impact, but a dark, ominous stain was spreading rapidly across his side, just below the plate. His eyes were open, wide with shock and confusion. "Ava," he gasped, his voice a wet, bubbling whisper. "Stay with me, Marcus!" "Look at me!" she commanded, her voice fierce as she ripped open a fresh combat gauze from her kit. She shoved the entire package into the wound, applying all her weight. He cried out, a short, sharp sound of agony. "Mia!" he choked out, his eyes desperate, pleading. "My girl!" Eva leaned closer, her face inches from his, her hands never stopping their work, trying to stem the impossible flow of blood. "I'm here, Marcus. I've got you. Tell her. Tell my girl." Her dad loved her, he whispered. Each word was a struggle, a breath stolen from the void. "Promise me." Tears she didn't know she was crying mixed with the sweat and grime on her face. "I promise," she said, her voice breaking. "I promise, Marcus. You're going to tell her yourself. You hear me? You're going home." It was a lie, a desperate, beautiful lie, and from the look in his fading eyes, they both knew it. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then the light in his eyes, that fierce, kind light, simply went out, his head lolled to the side. The chaos of the battle seemed to fade into a dull, muffled roar. Ava stared, her hands still pressed against the wound, now useless. The world narrowed to his still face, the dust settling on his uniform, the photograph of his daughter still tucked safely in his pocket. The A-10 Warthogs screamed overhead, their cannons unleashing a thunderous, roaring judgment on the enemy positions. The ground shook with the impacts, but Eva didn't flinch. She was anchored to that spot, to that man, by a promise made in the dirt, and by a loss that felt like a physical amputation. The battle was being won, but her war had just taken on a new, permanent shape. The world returned in a series of jarring, brutal snapshots. The deafening brrr of the A-10's cannons chewing the ridge into smoking gravel. The frantic shouts of the quick reaction force as they poured into the compound, their fresh faces a stark contrast to the grimy, exhausted Rangers. The desperate, clumsy hands of a combat medic pulling her away from Miller's body. She fought them, a raw, guttural sound tearing from her throat. "No, he needs me!" But the medic was stronger, his voice firm yet kind. "We've got him, Sergeant. We've got him." It was the lie they always told. The flight back on the medevac bird was a hollow, vibrating nightmare. Miller was laid out in the middle, a sheet now covering his face. Rivera sat across from her, a fresh bandage over his eye, his good one staring blankly at the shrouded form. No one spoke. The roar of the engines was a blessing, drowning out the need for words that didn't exist. Eva looked down at her hands. They were stained a rusty dark brown, Miller's blood caked deep under her fingernails and in the creases of her knuckles. She made a fist, then another, the skin pulling tight. She couldn't feel a thing. The next week was a blur of sterile procedures and muted sounds. The debriefings in a windowless room. The calm, professional voices asking her to recount the events over and over. The sight of Miller's rucksack and rifle, placed with solemn ceremony into the arms of a visiting command sergeant major. She was given a fresh uniform. She scrubbed her hands until the skin was raw and bleeding, but she could still see the ghost of the stain. They gave her time. They called it recuperation. She walked the dusty perimeter of the forward operating base, the mountains a constant mocking silhouette. She would see the Chinooks taking off and her heart would clench, remembering the weight of a photograph pressed into her hand. The promise echoed in her mind, a constant, punishing loop. "Tell my girl. Her dad loved her." She tried to write the letter a dozen times. The words were ash in her mouth, inadequate, pathetic little marks on paper that could never capture the man, his sacrifice, or the weight of his final request. The team was broken. Rivera was shipped to Germany for surgery. Davis was quieter, his eyes haunted. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a shared, heavy silence. They were a clock with a vital gear missing, unable to tick forward. They looked at her not with blame, but with a painful understanding. She had been there. She had heard his last words. She carried a piece of his end with her, and it was both a burden and a sacred, terrible trust. The day her orders came to rotate back to the States felt like a betrayal. She was leaving him behind. She was leaving all of them behind in the dust. She packed her gear, the process mechanical. At the bottom of her duffel bag, she found a single cracked 7.62mm cartridge casing. She didn't know when she had picked it up. It was from the fight. From the ridge, she held it in her palm, its cold, hard reality a sharp contrast to the fading, bloody memory on her hands. She closed her fingers around it, a tiny, metallic piece of a day that had shattered her world. It was the only thing she was taking home that mattered. The memory of the blood on her hands was so vivid she could almost smell it, the metallic tang cutting through the sterile, floral-scented air of the ceremony. The general's voice pulled her back to the present, his words finally piercing the fog that had enveloped her. For gallantry and intrepidity in action, at the risk of her own life above and beyond the call of duty. He was speaking about her. He was describing the moment she had crawled to Miller, the moment she had tried to plug the hole in his chest with her own hands, the moment she had received a dying man's last wish. He was turning the most horrifying, devastating failure of her life into a citation for valor. Her eyes, dry and burning from the effort of holding back the tide, dropped to the metal in its velvet-lined case. The sun caught the bronze star, making it gleam. It was cold. She knew it would be cold. It was just a piece of shaped metal, an object, a symbol that people who had never been there could understand. It could not capture the weight of a man's head as it grew heavy in your lap. It could not replicate the sound of his voice as it faded into nothing. It was a poor, hollow substitute for the living, breathing man who had shown her a picture of his daughter. The general turned to her. A smile was expected, a proud, stoic look of gratitude. Ava's facial muscles felt like stone. She could only manage a tight, thin line, a grimace that she hoped would pass for dignity. Her chest was so tight she thought a rib might crack. She saw his hands, old and spotted, reach for the medal. He lifted it, the ribbon dangling, a splash of garish blue and white against the formal green of the lawn. He was going to pin it to her. He was going to attach this cold, meaningless artifact to the uniform that still felt like a costume. He stepped close. She could smell his aftershave, a clean, sharp scent that was utterly alien. She felt the slight tug as the pin went through the thick fabric of her jacket, right over her heart. The metal settled against her chest. It was heavier than she expected. A dead weight, a brand. The audience, which had been holding a collective breath, erupted in applause. It was a wave of sound, respectful and sincere, but to Ava, it was the roar of the medevac helicopter. It was the crack of the sniper rifle. It was the sound of a promise being seared into her soul, and that was when it broke. The dam inside her, the wall of rigid discipline she had maintained for months, crumbled. The pressure was too great. A single hot tear escaped the corner of her eye. It felt scalding against her cool skin. It traced a slow, deliberate path down her cheek, a clean track through the invisible grime of a distant war. She did not sob. She did not shake. She just stood there at perfect attention as this one undeniable testament to her grief made its silent journey. It was not a tear of pride. It was not a tear of honor. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated loss. The medal on her chest meant nothing. It was an empty gesture. All the honor in the world could not fill the hole that Sergeant Marcus Miller had left behind. The applause was a mockery of the silence she carried inside, the silence where her team's laughter used to be. The applause finally faded, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The ceremony was over. The general shook her hand, his grip firm, his eyes searching hers for a pride that wasn't there. He saw only a deep, still pool of grief. "Your nation is grateful, Captain," he said, his voice low and meant only for her. She nodded, unable to form words, her throat a locked vault. People began to mill about, the formal lines dissolving into small, chatting groups. A colonel's wife approached, her face a mask of sympathetic admiration. "Such bravery," she said, touching Eva's arm lightly. "You're a true inspiration." Eva forced a nod, her smile a brittle, fragile thing that threatened to shatter. The words washed over her, meaningless and distant. She was an island in a sea of green uniforms and polite conversation. The weight of the metal on her chest pulling her deeper into herself. She needed to get away. She needed air that wasn't thick with perfume and praise. Muttering a quiet excuse, she turned and walked. Her steps measured and deliberate, away from the crowd, toward a quiet grove of oak trees at the edge of the parade field. The grass was softer here, the shade a cool relief. She could still hear the muffled sounds of the reception, but they felt a world away. Alone at last, she reached up, her fingers fumbling with the clutch fastener of the medal. With a sharp click, it came free. She held it in her palm, staring at it. The sun, filtering through the leaves, dappled the bronze with shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was just a thing, a piece of metal and ribbon. It couldn't bring back Miller's laugh. It couldn't bring back the easy camaraderie of the team before the ambush. It couldn't erase the image of Rivera's bloodied face or the hollow look in Davis's eyes after they returned to base. Her other hand slipped into the pocket of her dress blues. Her fingers closed around two objects. One was the cracked 7.62mm cartridge casing from the Kamdesh Valley. The other was the worn, laminated photograph of Mia, Miller's daughter, which his wife had given her at the funeral. She had promised to tell the girl about her father. She had promised. She looked from the cold, new metal in one hand to the warm, worn artifacts of her war in the other. The medal was for the world to see, a symbol of a single, official act of heroism. The casing and the photo were for her. They were the truth. They were the cost. They were the reason she was here and Miller was not. A deep, shuddering breath finally escaped her, the first real one she had taken all day. The tightness in her chest eased just a little. The medal meant nothing because it could never encompass the whole story. It couldn't capture the shared jokes, the silent watches, the weight of a shared canteen, the profound trust of a team. It was a token for a moment, but her grief, her loyalty, was for a lifetime. She wasn't a hero. She was a survivor, a keeper of promises, a rememberer. She tucked the medal back into its box and closed the lid. It was a part of her history, but it would never define her. Her heart, forever scarred and forever loyal, belonged to the team she missed, and that was the only truth that mattered.